exploring the basics. So we are introducing ourselves in the chat. For those of you, I do see those numbers still climbing, so feel free to use that chat to introduce yourselves, to ask questions along the way. Our moderators are keeping an eye on that chat and will be assisting us in that process. Of course, anything you share today, whether it's in the chat or in any of the polls that we're going to use throughout the presentation, this is all voluntary. If you just want to listen and be a fly on the wall, you feel free to do that. But we would love to have you share. We would love to learn alongside of you. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hop over to introducing our fantastic team. I am so excited about the folks that we've brought together today. If I do say so myself, we have some of the best and brightest in the world when it comes to energy and community service, what this looks like on the ground. We have Dr. Clark Miller. He is a professor and the director of the Center for Energy and Society at Arizona State University. We have Miguel, who is the policy director at Pacoima Beautiful, doing fantastic work in his community. And we have Nomini Silva-Send, a professor of practice at University of San Diego School of Law. And I am Connie Capiotis. I am a senior program manager here at Arizona State University. And I am just going to help us through this process and help us guide this conversation. All right, so let's go ahead and launch the poll here real quick. Lauren, if you could, I'd love to hear about how everyone arrived here today. So Clark and I are in Arizona at Arizona State. Nomini is in San Diego, which is in obviously California. Miguel is also in California, in Pacoima. And we all came together professionally through our work. How did everybody else arrive here? Fabulous.
Hey, Connie.
Someone recommended it. How's that?
Connie, we can see your notes on the screen.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Thank you for the heads up, Nomini. I appreciate that.
No problem.
That should be hidden.
Maybe because it's a pop.
There we go.
There
I apologize. That was supposed to be hidden. Thanks for the heads up. All right, rolling right along. All right, we've got some folks here that are interested in TA services with the CEEJ. Fabulous, really good diversity of how we all arrived here today. I'm going to give just a few more seconds there for that poll. All right, when we get to that minute mark, this was just a quick question. We'll go ahead and end that. And we'll keep going. Thank you, everyone, for contributing. We got a pretty good percentage of participation there. It's nice to see that everybody wants to go ahead and share. A lot of us came together through word of mouth, which is fantastic. Love that old-fashioned marketing. When you hear things from somebody you trust, you hop right on. So welcome, one and all. We are also brought to you today through the, I went one too far, excuse me. We are brought to you today by the Center for Community Energy and Environmental Justice, which is hosted by our wonderful folks at San Diego State University. And what you see here is our hub and spoke model, which really creates a nexus of all of this centralized expertise. This is coordination throughout Region 9 of the EPA, connecting each one of these organizations. We all have integral pieces that we attend to within the CEEJ, which is what we call ourselves for short. And our partners here at CEEJ all include the Center for Creative Land Recycling, the Climate Science Alliance, the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals, also called ITEP, the Desert Research Institute, the Pacific Research on Island Solutions for Adaptation, the Public Health Alliance, Arizona State University, University of Guam Center for Island Sustainability, and the University of San Diego Energy Policies Initiative Center, also called EPIC. Nomini is a part of EPIC as well. That is where she comes from. So welcome, one and all. That gives you a bit more background. And we are Team Energy, represented by Arizona State University, the University of San Diego Center for Energy Policy, EPIC Policy Initiatives, University of Guam Center for Island Sustainability, and the Pacific Research on Island Solutions for Adaptation. So that is our very large, very well-connected Region 19. And when you work with us, you get access to all of this expertise, including people, administration, grant capacity building, helping you to manage grants and build that capacity, working with tribal and indigenous communities, working on environmental quality and health, and of course, our team energy. So why are we here today? Let's grab into the meat. That's enough introductions. Why are we here today? Energy-related challenges in our communities, like high utility bills and reduced access to more efficient technologies, are absolutely impacting our communities. Unfortunately, marginalized communities are disproportionately impacted. We know this is fact. So there is definitive action needed around these issues. So we know we need to act. Number two, there's money available to tackle these issues in your community. The Justice 40 initiative and other resources are putting more money directly into the community than ever before. And we are literally here to help you drive that funding and to drive that effort into your communities. And the third piece is that many of these community projects require partnerships. So we're here to help you find the best partners to meet your mission and use our connections to become your connections. So when we're thinking about energy justice in our communities, today our focus is going to be getting to the roots about energy justice, how it impacts our communities, where you can begin taking action on these issues in your community. We're going to include examples of the issues in real life energy justice programs. So we've got a lot to cover. Let's go ahead and jump right in. And we have Miguel. I'm going to turn this over to you as soon as my screen wants to go ahead and turn over for me. Oh, there we go. Now it's going to be two. There we go. All right, Miguel, you go ahead and take it here for a minute. Please tell us about your incredible organization, Pacoima Beautiful, and the wonderful things that you're doing.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Connie, and hello, everybody. I'm Miguel. I'm the policy director for Pacoima Beautiful. We're a grassroots environmental justice organization here in the city of Los Angeles, primarily functioning out of the Northeast San Fernando Valley. Pacoima Beautiful has such a beautiful story. Right, we were originally founded by 5 mothers in 1996, like you see on the screen, who full-heartedly believed on the simple concept that beauty means a clean and safe community. After grappling with the history of redlining in this community, our organization has been able to thrive from those basic fundamental efforts from these 5 mothers, and we have really grown into a prime organization leading efforts across different environmental spaces, creating and fostering youth organizing, and really directing implementation projects across the board here in our community, and really trying to redo the unjust nature of redlining, and really trying to fix the environmental injustices. So that's a little bit about who we are, and we're really excited to provide some examples for you today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Miguel. And, there is absolutely nothing that a determined mama can't get done. And you put a bunch of determined moms together and you get amazing organizations like Pacoima Beautiful. So thank you so much for being here and for sharing that expertise with us and these real life examples. I know that's always so helpful for getting everyone in that mindset of how they can help in their own communities. So let's talk about a little bit about definitions. So let's talk about the roots of energy justice and how that shows up in relation to environmental justice. Clark, can you walk us through some of this?
Sure, and thanks, Connie, and it's great to be here with you and Nelmini and Miguel today. When we think about energy justice, it's a relatively new concept and idea, but it is in many ways grounded in this longer term issue that we've been grappling with in the United States around environmental justice. So what we have here is the definition of environmental justice. from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And if you could go on to the next slide, that's a lot of legalese, not surprisingly. It's EPA, and it's the result of decades of advocacy and engagement and really bottom-up action by communities, especially communities of color, who have been working to confront environmental injustice in their communities. When we think about environmental justice, we're really thinking about 4 core principles. You have 2 of them here that are sort of embedded in that definition. One of those is that no one should be unfairly or disproportionately impacted by environmental hazards. When we think about the history of environmental justice and environmental injustice, we're really looking at the history of polluting facilities that were located in and near communities of color, communities that were selected for those siting because they were disempowered, because they were low-income communities, because they didn't have the resources to fight back against those siting decisions. And so EPA is now saying, look, we shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be creating conditions of environmental hazards where those are disproportionately impacting some communities and not other communities. Second core principle is that on the flip side, when we think about our laws and our policy, those should protect all people in an equal fashion. If you could move on to the next slide. So 2 other kind of key principles for thinking about environmental justice. One is that when we make decisions that have environmental implications, whether those are decisions about where to site facilities, or those are decisions about how to write a policy or how to implement a policy, everybody should be empowered equitably to participate in those decisions and provide input into them so that those decisions reflect their perspectives, their experiences, their histories, their values when we think about environmental protection. And then finally, there is this core idea that everybody has a basic human right to a clean and healthy living and working environment. And if you'll go on to the next slide, we can kind of think about and understand how this set of ideas and principles about environmental justice have really helped inform thinking about energy justice, precisely because energy and energy infrastructures have been so central to the history of environmental justice activism and environmental injustices as they've been experienced by communities in the United States and elsewhere, right? So we know that many communities have had the experience of having large-scale power plants, often polluting power plants, mercury pollution from coal plants, other kinds of emissions from gas plants and coal plants in and near their communities, right? Oil refineries have been another frequent location where we have seen communities experience air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution from these facilities in an inequitable way. The location of transmission lines and decision-making about where to put transmission lines has been another site of frequent conflict over siting decision-making and siting authority with well-established evidence that transmission lines, for example, reduce property values along those lines. Other kinds of energy infrastructures, we see a variety of conversations about the siting of different kinds of energy infrastructures. We also see increasingly a set of concerns being expressed as we watch electricity grids go down in Texas and California due to various kinds of events. We've seen that those aging grid infrastructures are getting repaired and upgraded differentially across different communities so that the distribution of vulnerability to outages is different from community to community. That's another form of environmental injustice. So, and of course, a lot of this plays out in the context of historical redlining of neighborhoods and the ways in which that interacted with the design and siting of infrastructures, so that these sources of pollution, these sources of other kinds of disturbances in communities, noise, dust, etc., are being disproportionately located, have historically been disproportionately located in low-income communities and communities of color, and been the drivers of a lot of activism and policymaking around environmental justice. Next slide. So again, what we've seen as a result of this, these kinds of challenges in relationship to existing energy infrastructures, is disproportionate exposure to environmental pollution and hazards, disproportionate, therefore, experiences of health risks like asthma, that are often magnified by differential access to healthcare in these communities. So it's a combination of different things that add up to differential experiences, lower property values, and unfortunately segregated communities at times.
Thank you, Clark. That's a lot of information and a lot of different ways that energy and it really impacts our environment. Miguel, can you tell us a little bit how this shows up in your community and how this impacts your community?
Yeah, I mean, Clark has really outlined, I think, a perfect example, right, of the historic legacies that allow this sort of infrastructure to exist. Our community of Pacoima and the Northeast San Fernando Valley is located to the only inland power generating station for the city of Los Angeles that, you know, back in 2020, in the midst of a pandemic, was leaking methane and went unreported for a long period of time, only to exacerbate the public health crisis that was already existing. And on top of that, you layer all the other infrastructure polluting projects that exist here in our community, continue to exacerbate our air pollution. And it's very difficult when those needs are necessary, but are put on the responsibility of communities that are predominantly disadvantaged and predominantly of color. And so there continues to be this exhaustive need for resources, but again, at what price? And we continue to see it today, and really hope to, you know, continue this fight a little bit more forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Miguel. And nobody can fight for a community like its own members. So thank you for leading the charge on that where you are. All right, let's go ahead and move forward. Now, Minnie, could you please give us a bit more of history about energy justice and how it differs from climate justice?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Connie, and glad to see you all on the chat there. Energy justice, as Clark already mentioned, is really still emerging as a kind of a cross-cutting issue where we're trying to basically apply principles of justice to energy policy, to the systems, to production, consumption, and energy security. So, but if you think of the roots of it, as Clark mentioned, a lot of it can be traced to environmental impacts, which have come to light through community responses to the environmental impacts of energy production. But now we're going to add two other components to energy justice, and one of those is access to energy And we'll go into this a little bit more in the next few slides, as well as energy affordability and reliability. So these three components really form the basics of energy justice. Another component that we need to think about is how we're going to apply the principles of justice to these three areas. So we're thinking that we're talking really about procedural justice, about distributional justice, and then there's something also called corrective justice, which is connected with something called recognition. So procedural justice is basically, is any part of the community being ignored? How can the community be better involved in decision-making? Is there fair treatment and respect? Is there knowledge sharing, information disclosure? Is there institutional representation, things like that? Distributional justice is about, in energy, is now a lot about how the costs and benefits, dollar costs and dollar benefits of energy production and consumption should be distributed over the income groups, but also over time. And that's a factor that we haven't really looked at in the past that much to the future. And also about where production facilities should be located as we move into this energy transition, and then whether everyone has access to these new types of energy. The third component, this recognition component or correction sort of component, is where you both recognize that there has been an injustice and you recognize there could be in future as well, and acknowledge those sections of society affected by the past system and recognize new communities that may be affected by this current transition as well. So we need to think about all that when we think about energy justice. So it goes quite a bit beyond environmental justice. Can we have the next slide, please? So when we think about the past and the future of energy, we can sort of divide it up into three time periods. We're talking about early issues, impacts of colonialism, but not only. It really relates to the production of fossil fuels or the legacy of petroleum production. So that's a couple of hundred years. We can think, for example, of indigenous communities being pushed aside, actually physically relocated for energy production, like in New Mexico, so that some sort of Western lands were even designated by the US government as sacrifice zones for energy production and had no chance of rehabilitation. And by the way, this doesn't only affect indigenous communities. We see it everywhere in the world, even today in Germany, for example, where whole villages are being relocated so that companies can have access to the coal that's underneath. And then we can think of this transition period where we're searching for locating new technologies. So for siting of solar and wind farms, some of these affected communities are perhaps newly affected, like certain areas of rural parts of the West or anywhere really. And we can also think about the transmission that we may need if we're going to have a lot of large solar facilities or wind farms. And so we recognize that we need to make the transition, but it's about trying to apply these principles that I spoke about earlier. And then, of course, the last sort of component for the future or currently are these transition issues. We were going to have transition issues related to stranded assets when we switch from coal, oil, gas to solar and wind. We have communities that have benefited from the production of those things, and we will have to decommission a lot of these facilities. So it's about how to work with the communities that are affected by these transition issues. Connie, how about the next slide? Thank you. So going a little bit more into the energy affordability area, we know that high energy costs create a larger burden for those living in poverty, but of course, it can also cause people to slip into poverty. So right now we hear a lot about the high cost of electricity in California and the fact that it's maybe influenced by this transition to a more renewable energy system. And we hear that many people are slipping in, they can't pay their bills. In the past, we also had that situation, but it doesn't quite arise to the same extent that it does today. And that is partly because the new renewable energy generation is actually more costly than the previous forms, even while it is more distributed. So, for example, if you take rooftop solar or more efficient technologies in our homes, like say induction cooktops instead of natural gas cooktops, or access to electric vehicles and charging stations and so on, they all have high upfront costs, regardless of savings later on. So, which makes access to this stuff a cost issue. Another cost issue comes from the need to potentially transform the electricity grid to be able to take in more of this distributed and diverse supplies of energy. And how to finance this is an ongoing debate everywhere. And so for energy justice, the question is how communities that are or might be affected can take part in such proceedings or debates and have their voices heard, really. Next slide, please, Connie. So the third component we were talking about was energy reliability, or we provided that in the first slide there. Today, energy reliability is associated with a couple of factors. One is this access, and what we're talking about really is access to the clean energy. How many people can afford clean energy, say rooftop solar? How many people can actually have it because they live in apartments? So access and therefore reliability also comes into the question. So the second is maybe nothing to do with our ability to pay for it, but it's about the fact that renewable energy is not available at all times of the day. The sun doesn't shine all the time, and the wind may not even blow for weeks. So we need to store this energy for use later on. And at times, we may be exposed to power shutoffs just because the system is unable to provide the energy at all times. And on top of this, we now have to think about the impacts of climate change, the very thing that is causing us to switch to renewable energy. And this is where energy justice and climate justice kind of connect. So for example, we might expect power outages during heat waves because parts of the transmission line have to be shut off to prevent damage from high temperatures or fires. And such shutoffs may disproportionately affect low-income communities. And when we have wildfire here in the West, it can also destroy infrastructure, and that can also affect low-income communities disproportionately. The same thing actually happens when we have gas outages. Low-income communities are less able to cope with any kind of outages. In places also where they have typhoons, we can expect that increased intensity of typhoons, to the extent that that affects the energy supply, will also become an energy reliability issue and also therefore a cost issue. And Connie, the next slide, please. Of course, along with all these changes and transitions, we do have impacts on jobs in the communities. As we mentioned, there are, along with the assets that we might have to leave behind or decommission, our communities that have relied on those for decades. And so we have job losses from closures of these refineries or coal mines, but also we have job losses from moving away from using natural gas in our buildings, for example, and converting to electricity, so that workers who were involved in, say, installing this infrastructure in your home or in a building would have to retrain to do something else. At the same time, we do have, like that case, job gains from new energy technologies, from solar installation and service, maybe even a little bit of manufacturing, wind installation and service, batteries, installation, service, and even manufacture, if it is possible in the US. So all these new jobs require training, but it is possible. Actually, here in San Diego, my university was involved as part of a University of California study looking specifically at jobs that will likely be lost in our county, those that would be replaced and those that needed new training. So I have quite a nice modeling of that effect. Next, Connie, please.
Great. Let's take a pause here just for a moment if we could. Lauren, could you launch our next poll for us? So we want to hear from you about the jobs impact on your community. Nomini just told us about the studies that they're doing in their areas. We'd like to hear from you. Is energy transition currently creating a workforce shift in your community? We want to hear about how this is showing up. Is this affecting your world yet? Let's go ahead and take a look. Looks like it's starting to affect a lot of communities. A good handful of us are being seriously impacted. Yeah, it's becoming an inevitability at this point, and it's not if, it's when, and how are we going to deal with it? Yeah, we've got around 75, 80% saying that we are having major work shifts or it's beginning to show up in their community, but hasn't made a total impact yet. So that accounts for quite a bit of our audience, quite a bit. That's 84% right now. We're going to give this about 5 more seconds, and then I'm going to go ahead and end this poll. So if you haven't gotten your answer in there yet, here is our last call. And we're going to go ahead and finish up with that. And we can see here that we've got 85% of participants that chose to answer this. Yeah, that this is either having a serious impact or it's beginning to happen in their communities. So this seems like something that quite a few of us are experiencing. Thank you so much for the participation. And let's go ahead and hop back into more examples around climate justice and energy. Thank you, Nomi.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's quite a lot of people affected by these changes
Absolutely.
in jobs. But there's a little bit more, so it gets more complicated because let's think about the connection between climate justice and energy. And here we're talking really about first, let's start really with the impacts of climate change on communities. For example, we know the most common one is increased heat and also the rising sea. So they're the best known examples. And we really have to start layering these onto environmental justice and energy justice, which makes it very complicated. We're talking about dealing with this type of impact onto the existing inequities already due to environmental and energy legacies in generation, access, and costs, as well as the new potential inequities caused by the new energy, also citing generation, access, and costs. So the one thing I think to realize about this is that reducing greenhouse gases, that means reducing the use of fossil fuels, petroleum, gasoline, gas, is inherently equitable because there will be benefits to all, including for the future generations when we make this transition. In the past, we didn't really think so much about future generations, but now with climate justice and the new energy, we do have to think about it. And there is actually a report out by NRDC that shows that in areas where vehicle electrification takes place, there will be a decrease of greenhouse gas emissions at the ground level and therefore better air quality, including a reduction in ozone formation at the ground level. And ground level ozone is really the main cause of smog and therefore health effects as well. So we have to kind of balance all these things together to be able to talk about energy, environmental, and climate justice. But although the focus of our webinar and our whole team is on energy, we have to realize where these things interconnect to be able to deal with it holistically. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Connie. I think that's it for now from me.
All right, let's talk a little bit about how climate justice issues are showing up in the real world in each region. Nomini, did we talk about this?
I mean, we can talk about that, sure. I think
Yeah, let's go ahead and just touch on this here real quickly. Do you want to discuss it or would you like me to?
I mean, sure, I can discuss it. Let's see, we talked a little bit about the costs. So in Region 9 in California, we do have high electric and gas rates, especially high electric rates for those who cannot afford these upfront costs for distributed solar or, having the latest all-electric home, versus those who remain on the existing system who potentially have to bear greater costs because the whole system has still to be maintained. And we have increasing costs from the need to protect against increasing wildfires. So that's California, it's a lot there. In the Pacific Islands, we already had high rates because of the fuel costs. And we have old systems that were already subject to frequent power disruptions from existing weather events, and we can expect more of the same. So in the future, with warmer temperatures, we need more reliable systems. If the systems are old, they need to be replaced and maintained. And if there's going to be increased intensity of typhoons, we can expect even the new systems to be disrupted more frequently because of the impacts of climate change. And then over to Arizona, Nevada, we've already got high cooling costs, even though we have lower electric rates compared with, say, California. But what do we do when the temperatures increase even more? So how much more do we need to cool and therefore increase costs? Those are a couple of examples throughout our region.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for those. And, we're going to have to be building more cooling centers as the heat continues to rise. It's a serious issue for those of us here in Arizona. Let's go ahead and talk to you guys. I saw some people putting in the comments like you would love it if the electricity didn't go out every time there's a storm in California. So let's go ahead and launch this next poll. Which of these environment-related energy justice issues are you seeing in your communities? Let's talk about it. Are you having oil and gas leak issues? Are you experiencing pollution challenges due to energy production, nuclear waste, intensified weather, mining issues, all of the above? How is this showing up for you? We learn better from each other.
Yes, it's a combination of environmental, energy, and climate justice.
Yeah. Talking about how this shows up for each of us in our communities. Good stuff there. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. I'm seeing those numbers steadily climbing. 88% in Region 9 of these participants on this webinar right now are experiencing intensified weather. So stronger weather, stronger typhoons, higher temperatures. Yep, lots of it. Oil and gas, air pollution. We've got a lot of challenges to tackle in our communities, and these are things that are no longer theoretical. They're being seen and felt dramatically within our communities. All right, I'm going to give this just 5 more seconds. And I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Thank you all for your contributions. Let's go ahead and share these results. 88% experiencing intensified weather. 33% high air pollution, 23% oil and gas leaks. So we've got some work to do. Let's go ahead and talk about that. What are some of the challenges that we're going to experience as we tackle these issues in our community? And I can't think of who better to ask about the challenges of doing this work than the warrior on the ground that is doing the work. Miguel, could you chime in here? No, we're all warriors on the ground doing the work, but Miguel, I want to hear about Pacoima, and I want to hear about what your experience is specifically.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest components of being on the ground is that once you start to unravel one injustice, you pull on many, right? And I think for us, in these conversations that you've listened to so far, you heard a lot about like the infrastructure injustices, but also really shining a light on the systemic injustices. And I think one of the hardest real life examples is the COVID-19 pandemic that has pushed community members to a financial brink, that have found it very difficult, not only for their public health to maintain energy efficiency in their home, to keep the lights on as people were home for that extended period of time, out of safety. Now we see the financial burdens of what that can bring. And with a push to clean energy, without a holistic approach on housing rights, on labor rights, on all these other strings that I mentioned, without addressing them holistically, we will only continue to perpetuate those systems a little more. And for us, I think we're really starting to see the effects of what has happened when we don't address these systemic changes, and we just sort of keep allowing or creating simple solutions and implementation solutions without really addressing the systems that allow these sort of injustices to exist. So that is really what we're starting to see here on the ground, especially because there is a true financial burden that people have to face when deciding between keeping the lights on or paying for rent or health and medical bills and so on. And so there's a lot of true challenges here, and making sure that we address them holistically is important to do.
Agreed. You've got to kind of go at it from all fronts, get together, get organized, make a plan. All of these pieces go together. Thank you so much for that, Miguel. Absolutely true. So we talked here about challenges. We know we're going to hit some. We know that we've got to gather our strategies and whatnot. Clark, let's go ahead and turn to you for your expert opinion on the ways that we can go about creating some solutions.
Yeah, thanks, Connie. Wow. Zoom resonance there. You know, the way I try to approach this is by thinking about the energy transition as an opportunity. Miguel was talking about the systems, right, that historically have had a variety of different negative impacts and consequences in communities that we now call energy and environmental injustice issues. And, you know, the opportunity is, as a lot of people call for, to do systems change. And that opportunity exists because we're really at a moment in the history of our energy system where, you know, we're going to take out one set of energy systems and we're going to put in another set of energy systems. And we have the chance to design what those forward-looking future energy systems will look like. There's a lot of competing ideas, right? There are a lot of people who think, well, we've got, you know, an electricity system that works reasonably well, so let's just, you know, take a few power plants off and put in a few new power plants on that use less carbon, and, you know, that'll be good enough. But I think there's an opportunity to do a lot more than that. I like to think about it, you know, several different ways of approaching this. The first is, you know, there's no reason that our energy system should be designed as they unfortunately are at the moment, so that they exacerbate and perpetuate extreme poverty and the consequences of extreme poverty. And so that means really understanding those dynamics that Miguel was talking about just a second ago, about how the costs of energy systems, the costs of energy efficiency upgrades, the costs of new kinds of energy technologies are woven into particular communities, because it's different for different communities. I've done work here in Arizona, I've done work in Puerto Rico, I've done work in Western Africa, and energy poverty is experienced differently in different places. And so the first thing is to understand, what does that energy poverty context look like in the place where you're working? And then how can we create energy innovations? And I don't just mean technologies here, but how we weave those technologies into the social fabric, into the economic fabric, so that we can make the energy system work for low-income communities and communities of color rather than work against them. And there's lots of examples of how to do that. So similarly, we need to be thinking about, as we're changing these larger energy infrastructures, how do we understand what those what impacts those infrastructures will have, both negatively and in terms of the benefits, and then how do we skew the design of those projects so that they create more positive benefits and fewer negative impacts. And that really means engaging and involving communities in infrastructure design much earlier in the process, so that the communities can be part of sorting through how to think about where infrastructures are sited, and then with respect to those infrastructures, how we're designing those infrastructures in a variety of different ways. And then, I think that one of the really crucial pieces is that we need to take advantage, especially with solar, of both the flexibility in how we put solar down. It's not just rooftop and utility scale. There's all kinds of ways that we can integrate solar into our urban landscapes. And we can use that solar not only to provide clean energy, but also to provide revenue streams to community organizations, to create resilience to emerging climate risks, to create shade, and even cooling capabilities that reduce heat risks, to find ways to share the financial benefits of those projects more broadly so that we can reduce energy costs and burdens. In other words, multi-solving with solar design for lots and lots of different kinds of benefits becomes an opportunity to really take advantage of the flexibility of especially community solar design processes. So
I love it. What was that word you just used?
Multi-solve.
Thank you. Multi-solving. I love that. All right. I'm going to be picking your brain about that again later and in future webinars for sure. All right. We're going to have Miguel chime back in here real quick because I want to hear about specific solutions and how they're taking these principles and putting them in their community. And then we're going to go ahead and jump back to the chat and do questions and answers. So Miguel, can you go ahead for us?
Yeah, of course. I think, one of the hardest things that comes to this is the level of technical knowledge that is surrounded with energy justice and energy burden. Obviously, for our community members, including them in the design process, from them leading the initial ideas, right, to giving them the space to learn the technical knowledge, not just behind the screen, but taking them fully in person to experience the city that they live in day to day, to see what these solutions can be, is really where our organization has taken that lead. We've had an opportunity to really introduce unique programs like an electric bike share program to not only just talk about clean mobility and electrification with transportation, but what does it look like when we can train community members to do so safely and to do so in a fun environment with community members just like them. We've also had an opportunity to start understanding the complexities of the housing crisis here in Los Angeles, coupled with the energy burden crisis as well, to really not only just do direct installation of solar panels on a specific block here in our community, but really to understand how can we make these types of projects at a larger scale and present to our utility company and present to our representatives that these are the types of projects that we need, but also how do we make sure that we can do so without displacing community members, and also making sure that these efficient solutions can continue to thrive and not raise the prices of properties, not raise the prices of rent. And really, I think our goal, we've had a great opportunity to really be hand in hand with community members who tell us affordability is key and bill assistance is key. And really taking that to heart and understanding that there is a level of advocacy that we've been implementing here on the ground, organizing and grassroots organizing with our community hand in hand to take them to elected officials, representatives. And even though that may seem cumbersome at times, these stories and experiences are often necessary and also give us an opportunity to really highlight why these solutions are essential. And we've had a lot of great opportunity to start capacity building and really start coming up with game plans that are entrenched in community to the fullest extent. Because I think what we really want to do is start building systems where, if you heard me talk about this the entire presentation, but if there is no system if the system isn't being fixed, then us as a community can make our own. One that works for us and is designed by us. And I think that is really where Pacoima Beautiful has led the community in that sort of energy justice. And we're excited to continue, and we're excited to keep building our energy resilience and capacity, and really hope that we can keep going forward.
So many snaps. Miguel, thank you so much for speaking on that so eloquently. That gives everybody in our audience so many ideas for how they can drive their communities and their organizations forward.